epic. It's the only way to describe the tale of origins of the Rolex Explorer. In this video, we'll be taking a look at the watch that was created to commemorate the great accomplishment of summiting Everest. We're not only going to look at its storied history, but move to the modern Explorer. Fast forward and see if this watch is a worthy successor. So we're going to get in depth with the various specifications of this modern watch, the ways that it's advanced and evolved, and the ways that the watch has changed in some of its design aspects. And really that's going to involve an economic goods conversation that just needs to come up when you talk Rolex. It's going to be an interesting conversation because the status of this watch is somewhat complex. It's going to be a lot of fun to talk about it. On the 29th of May, 1953, Everest was summited. A Brit, Sir Edmund Hillary, although not yet a Sir, and his expedition partner, Tenzing Norgay, arrived at Everest together, and together they've always said that they summited Everest. But what were they wearing as far as their timepieces were concerned? Amazingly, we don't have a definitive answer. We do know that both explorers were issued Rolexes. That is to say that Rolex gave them watches to wear for the purpose of research and development, although they were not to be kept by the explorers. But we also know that both explorers were wearing a British brand of watch called a Smith's. And interestingly, Hillary later on in life did advertisements for both Rolex and Smith's, and actually went so far as to say that he carried a Smith's all the way to the top. Furthermore, we have photographs that exist of both of the explorers wearing watches on both wrists. So some of the horological history of the first Everest summit will always be shrouded in mystery. We do know at least that Norgay's Rolex at least made it to the top, and that after the great expedition, Rolex quickly named this Oyster Perpetual, referenced 6350, the Explorer, and a significant and historic line of watches remains with us since then. The newly minted Explorer featured three key aspects, in addition to being an Oyster Perpetual, that is to say, having a sealed case and a perpetual movement. It had a painted tritium dial with Arabics at 3, 6, and 9. It had a special twin-lock crown that ensured absolute water resistance. And then lastly, it had the quintessential all-steel bracelet. Fast forward to 1989, and we have the reference 14270, the first modern Explorer. It featured a up-to-date Rolex movement, the 3000 movement. It featured a flat sapphire crystal, and in a major departure from all previous Explorers, featured gold 3, 6, and 9 Arabic numbers and gold hands. It also had a glossy dial. The reception of this new watch was mixed, to say the least. Many viewed it as a blatant effort for Rolex to move further into the luxury segment, in spite of a quality decrease. One of the most famous and prominent criticisms can be still found in an article on Time Zone, which meticulously looks at the movement, construction, and quality issues that were associated with this watch. These criticisms against Rolex were not slight in the least, and so as quickly as 2001, Rolex released an updated version of the 14270, the 114270. That reference was the immediate predecessor of the watch featured in this video, the 21470. Tedious reference numbers aside, this current Rolex is certainly best known as the 39mm Rolex, as it represents the first model that Rolex has updated in size from 36mm since the Explorer's introduction. As always, one of the key features in the Explorer, also notably, the stainless steel bracelet was updated with a so-called oyster lock clasp, which is a significant improvement over the pressure clasp of previous generation Explorers. The 39mm Explorer also features subtle but significant updates in the chronometer movement, as well as in aspects of the dial design. We'll discuss that. First, let's talk dial and case. You'll notice that with the dial, we've returned to a matte dial once again, a nod to the original Explorers. You've also noticed that we've retained the gold rhodium-plated hands and 369 Arabics. Now, these Arabics are interesting because there's a lot of discussion basically with regard to the proportions of both the placement of the aerobics and the hands. There's widespread criticism that the hands on this Explorer are actually from the previous generation, and in that sense are very small, or at least disproportionate. Considering the controversial arguments surrounding this specific aspect, I'll just speak for myself and say that I wish the hands were a little bit bigger. For me, the minute hand would look better if it was able to reach that track on the border of the dial. Of course, in this itineration of the Explorer, we still have the famous twin lock crown, and the experience of this crown is pleasant. Unthreading the crown from the case is an exercise in consistency. Hand winding it is buttery smooth, very typical of a Rolex, and then taking it out to its second position for a hacking enables you to very seamlessly and smoothly change the time. As for the crown size, of course, it's perfectly machined and serviceable to use, but it does seem a little bit small. The solid end-link bracelet and the Oyster Lock clasp were billed as major upgrades, and indeed they are. One area that Rolex's very high manufacturing standards show in this impeccable bracelet and clasp. You'll notice tons of examples of fine machining and an overall sense of absolute perfection in the mechanical functions of the clasp. This bracelet is called the Oyster bracelet because it not only locks mechanically but also has an overfolding clasp that snaps into place. And it also has this great little feature called an Easy Link, which is basically a half link of extension, which, as you can see, gives you a little bit of room to increase the bracelet length by roughly 5 millimeters. So it would definitely help in a situation where your wrist might be swelling a little bit. As far as wearability goes, there just isn't a more comfortable bracelet than the Oyster bracelet, and that's true both of vintage ones and the modern ones. They're just the best. They're very comfortable to wear. They enable the watch to sit on the wrist in a very natural way. The case on the Explorer, with its large threaded case back, actually sits a little bit proud on the wrist, but the nature of the fixed links in the case and the downward sloping lugs, which unfortunately are no longer pierced lugs, enable the watch to nevertheless sit extremely comfortably and confidently on the wrist. And in my opinion, on my about 7¼ inch wrist, this watch fits great. Rolex now famously uses 904L stainless steel, which is a highly corrosion resistant and polishable steel. Now, my experience is that it scratches just as easily as any other steel, but it is beautiful and allows for exceptional depth of polish and refinement in the brush surfaces. The flat, uncoated, thick sapphire crystal is a Rolex staple in their modern watch line, and although it's somewhat uninspiring on paper or in stock photos, in real life I find it to be quite elegant. And as for the kit that Rolex is coming these days, let's just say it's pretty basic. One of the essential reasons that the Explorers are considered an Explorer's watch and are so indestructible are the Rolex calibers that run the watch. And in this model, we have the 3132 movement, which is an automatic COSC certified movement. That just means that it's proven to be accurate within a very small margin of seconds. It's significant for a mechanical watch. The 3132 movement beats away at 28,800 beats per hour, which makes it certainly a high beat mechanical movement. Now, compared to a lot of ETA movements which beat away at 21,600 beats per hour, it's noticeably smoother, and I think that this really adds to the je ne sais quoi quality that Rolexes are known for. Again, this elegant feature is exceptional and probably one of my favorite features on a Rolex. The 3132 movement is also up to date as far as technological features go. With the 48-hour power reserve, it's also protected by a so-called Parachrom hairspring and a Paraflex shock absorber. This hairspring will enable the watch to be less affected by magnetic fields, and it's also less susceptible to vibration. And the Paraflex is basically a shock absorbance system surrounding the balance to ensure that the spring is less likely to jump out and is going to hold the upper bearing jewel in its position as much as possible. So if we weigh the provenance and the technical features alone, the Explorer is an outstanding watch. It's robust and it has an amazing history. But what about the value proposition aspect? Here's where things get a little dicey. First of all, we've got the issue that essentially this is still being framed as a luxury watch, which to me seems a little bit astray from the original watch and use of this watch that the Explorer is meant to commemorate. There's also the whole market segment and quote-unquote economic good that Rolex has managed to corner for itself. We were talking about the fact that Rolex is obviously a status symbol and arguably a kind of positional good, that is, a good that's desirable and without substitute just based on its social perspective and its price. To me, Swiss watches have gone crazy in price lately, considering, for example, that in 1989 this watch could have been had for $2,500, and now the retail is around $5,000. So in some ways I feel conflicted about this watch. On the one hand, I recognize Rolex's superior manufacturing process and the impeccable materials and construction that they've used to enable this watch to be very high quality and very high class. On the other hand, it seems like there's so much of an emphasis on the classiness part of it that it's lost some of that essential tool nature that the whole Explorer line came from. If you just need an all-around reliable Rolex that's simple and straightforward, then the Explorer is a great choice. But for me, I'm too drawn to the emotional impact of the heritage of this watch. In fact, a real grail of mine would be a 1016 Explorer with a nice tropical dial. I'm just such a sucker for patina. So what's your take on the current itineration of the Explorer, this 39mm model? Let me know in the comments below. I'd like to thank a couple friends who allowed me to spend quite a bit of time with this watch. This is not my watch, it was a loaner. And I also want to thank you for taking the time to watch this video and for liking and sharing it, and for your subscription if you haven't subscribed already. Thanks a lot.